What's up everybody, welcome back. So we're gonna do a whole bunch of different things today. We're gonna take a look at setting up some physics materials for the enemy and also hit locations, so we can have headshots with different damage multipliers and things like that. I also have the Lyra impact FX added here, so we're gonna take a look at setting that up. And then since we're gonna be using our weapons a whole lot more, we're gonna take a look at the fire and reload and weapon switching events, because currently we can lock up our animations if we fire too fast after switching a weapon and things like that. So we're gonna do a little bit of smoothing out as well. So that's pretty much today's video. If you like what I do and you want to become a member, you can now join the channel, and otherwise you can have a look at the Ko-fi page. Becoming a member will give you a membership badge and access to premium channels in the Discord with some premium downloads in there as well. And if you do not want to become a member, you can still join the Discord obviously and just talk about some game dev stuff or show off a project that you made or ask a question about a video. So with those announcements out of the way as well, let's dive into the video. So first of all, I want to have a look at the AI perception. So we set it up that when the AI has a new player that enters his sight range, he will switch targets to that new player. And we kind of have to limit that, because otherwise every time a new player enters our sight range, we will simply switch to that player, and that will get a little bit weird. So we need to make sure that he can switch targets if we want to, but he doesn't need to do it all the time as well. So I'm loading a game meanwhile, so I can try and show it. So there should be a bunch of guys following me and a bunch of guys following the enemy. And if they are actually close to the enemy and they should be attacking him right now, if I start walking into their sight range, they will start following me. So that's not really an idea. It's not really too hard to set up, so we're going to go into our AI controller, and in here we need a new boolean. So let's create a new variable, and I'm going to call this can switch targets. And now we're going to set it up inside of the update perception event, so on target perception updated. And in here we check if the target that we perceived is our current target or not. So over here, the false pin, that actually tells us that the target that we perceived is our active target. So we're going to grab a branch over here and plug it in. And we're also going to grab the successfully sensed bool over here. So if we successfully sensed our own target, then we're going to make sure that we cannot switch targets anymore. So we're going to grab our can switch targets and set it to false. And if our active target leaves our sight range, then we're going to set this to true. So over here, if we plug it into the false pin, we want to set it to true. And then if a new target enters our sight range, we need to make sure that we check if we actually can switch targets. So we're going to make a little bit of room in here and grab a branch, plug it in. And over here we need our can switch targets boolean. And if we can switch targets, then we're going to set this back to false and plug it back in. So then we're going to make the new target our active target, and because he is inside of our sight range, we're going to make sure that we set it to false, so this matches up again. And then if the active target would leave our sight range and we would be still alive, then we can set it back to true. So this should make it behave a little bit better in game, and I'm not going to keep testing it because that takes a little bit too long. So we're going to test this a little bit later. And let's move on to the next part. So I want to take a look at setting up some physics materials for the AI. So I'm going to set up a physics material to use for the impact FX from the Lyra project. So I have a separate mini-series about using the Lyra FX inside of your own projects, and I actually implemented this in this project. So if you want to use that, you can follow the mini-series as well, and it's actually tied into this series. And then you will have the Lyra impact FX available inside your project as well. And we're going to set up the body FX impact and also the floating damage numbers. So inside that mini-series, you created physics materials inside of your project settings. So over here, project settings, and then go to physics, scroll down. And over here we can define our physics materials, and we're going to use the body type now for the enemy. So if you want to create it right now, you can do it in here. And after you created that, you need to create an actual physical material. So if you right click and go to physics, you can create a physical material and give that a name. And if you open it up, then all you need to do is over here for the surface type, you need to select the correct surface type you want this physics material to use. And once you have that set up, we're going to go inside our AI character. And let's have a look at our mesh. So this is the material that we're using. So I'm going to double click it, and it's a material instance. So I'm going to look at the parent over here, and let's browse to it. So that's the also a material instance, looking at the name, so MI. So let's open this up as well, and the parent is Dusk parent, so that's also in this folder over here. So this is the parent material for pretty much all of the minions in here, and we can set the physics material for this material over here. So I'm going to set it to the physics material body, and then if I hit this with a line trace, it will return the surface type body. So that's what we're going to use for our impact fix. So let's save this, and that's probably going to take a little bit. It does take a little bit. There we go. So if you have this set up and you actually follow the mini-series, then this will already work. So if you go in game and you fire at an enemy, then the line trace will return the body physics material, and that should have the body sparks impact tied to it. And I'm not sure if the damage numbers will work for you right away, but we're going to take a look at that a little bit later. So first of all, I want to set up some hit locations as well. So if we hit an enemy in an arm or in the head, we can actually tell and add some damage multipliers to that. So to set up some different hit locations, we first need to change something in our damage interface. So let's go to the interface for the damage, and in here I'm going to add a new input, and that's called hit bone name. And that's a name variable. So change it to a name. And then if you want to use the floating damage number impact fix, you also need the impact location in here. So I'm going to add the hit location, and that's a vector. And then we can compile and save it. And first let's go into our own character, so the hero base character. And in here we need to go into our server process hits function, because we're making the call to the damage interface and we just added 2 new inputs in here. So let's make sure that we connect them up, and we can simply get those from the hit result over here. So the hit bone name actually returns the hit surface from our physics asset. So there we go. And the location can be plugged in our hit location, and then that should be good to go. So compile and save it, and then we need to go into our AI character to make some changes to the take damage function. So let's open our minion base character, and in here we have the take damage interface function, and we're going to make some changes in here. So first of all, let's add 2 new local variables, and the first one I'm going to add is local is headshot. And the second one is the local damage. So local damage. So the headshot is a boolean and damage is a float. And right now I'm only gonna set up headshots, but you can expand this to, well, not infinity, because there's not so much limbs on the character, but for each limb you could set this up if you want, and you could use a switch on name, for example. So if you drag off here and you look for switch, you can switch on the name, and then you can go into your character's physics asset and make sure that you use the names from the physics asset, because those will be returned in the trace results. So if you go to a character mesh and you would open up one of the physics assets, then Obviously this one isn't set up correctly, so there's nothing in here. Let me grab this one, and that's also root. Okay, there we go. So this one maybe. So if you select one of these, you will see they have the actual names of the bones they are attached to, and those names will be returned in the trace result. So that's what we're using, and you can use a switch on name and get all the names from your physics asset. So with that out of the way, let's go back into our take damage function. And first of all, we want to set up the is headshot part. So we're going to drag off the hit bone name, and we're simply going to check if that is head. So let's equal. And if it's head, then we had a headshot. So let's add a branch in here, and we can do that after the is valid check. So we do not need to worry about it if the hit is not valid, obviously. So plug it in over here, and then we can make sure that we grab our local variable and set it. So let's grab two setters over here. So if we had a headshot, let's set it to true and make sure that we plug everything back in here. And then over here where we actually apply our damage, then we could say, well, if we had a headshot, let's multiply our damage by 2, for example. So let's make a little bit of room over here again. And then we're gonna grab a branch, and we need to do it in front of here actually. So let's move over all of these pins, and then we want to know if we had a headshot or not. And if we did, we're gonna set our local damage variable. So let's grab a setter for that. If it's false, we can simply grab the damage amount from the input. So that's actually the green line that already goes back all the way over here. So let's plug that in over here. And if we had a headshot, we can multiply it with 2, for example. So let's drag off here and simply multiply it and plug it in over here. So double the damage. And then over here we want to make sure that we use the damage local damage variable. So plug that in over here and connect up the execution. And now that should work as well. And a pretty nice way to test this would be our damage number fx. So if you want to use the actual damage number fx from the Lyra game, we can set it up over here as well. So we're going to make a little bit more room, and then we want to cast to our character. So let's grab the attacker from the input node over here, and we're going to cast to our base character. So that's hero base, and plug it in over here. And then we actually need to make a function inside of our base character. So let's close this down and let's go to our base character. And inside the event graph, we can create a new function called something like spawn damage numbers. And that needs to be a replicated event to replicate on the owning client. So let's create a custom event. So we only want the actual local client to see the damage numbers. The other players don't need to see them. So that's why we're going to replicate it to the owning client. So let's call it spawn damage numbers. And first of all, let's set the replication. So run on owning client. And since the server is the one that's handling all of our AI stuff, the server is the one running this take damage function. So the server will call this and then replicate it to the owning client, so that should be fine. Now in here, what I'm gonna do is actually go to the blueprint that we created in the mini series, and I'm gonna simply grab a bunch of stuff from here. So let's go to our weapon impacts blueprint, and we can actually change this up a little bit. So we're going to move the damage numbers to our character, so we can get rid of the damage info array over here. So let's disconnect it for now. And then we have the spawn system at location for the body impacts, where we create our damage info array. So we don't need that anymore as well. So let's disconnect it and move it to the side. So just like this. And then down here we can simply disconnect the completed pin, and we're going to move this stuff to our character. Well, most of it that is, so we don't need the locally controlled check because we're simply going to replicate it to the correct player, so that should be fine. Let's get rid of that. And let's copy all of this for now. We don't really need all of it, but let's just cut it from here and then compile and save. And then go to our base character and we can paste it back in here. So I'm going to make this a little bit simpler. I'm not going to use a variable to store it and things like that. I'm simply going to spawn a damage number for every hit that we have. So that makes things a little bit easier. So we can simply get rid of most of this stuff over here, and also for the body impact. And we're going to create a few inputs on our event. So the first one is the location, and that's a vector. And then we have the damage amount, and that's a float. Damage amount, that should be a float. And the last one, we want to know if this is a headshot. So is headshot, and that's a boolean. So we want to spawn a system at location, and we're going to plug in the actual location directly from the input over here. And then we want to make sure that we do grab the nodes from back here, so we can get rid of the Niagara system variable and the damage info as well. And we can simply plug in the return value into the system over here. So we want to set the user damage info, and we need to make an array for that. So let's drag off here and look for make array. And then we can drag off this vector var again, and we want to make a vector var. And for this vector var, we can simply drag off the location and break it. So the first three inputs are the actual impact location over here. And then the last float in the vector var is the damage amount. So we can plug that into the W, and then we have the damage info set up as well. And that's plugged into the Niagara system. So that should be good to go. And then we can also set up our critical hit boolean to work with our headshot. So if we have a headshot, our damage numbers will turn red. So let's make sure that we go inside of our damage number fx if you haven't done that already. And in here you want to create a new user exposed boolean. So click the plus sign and you want to go to common and create a new bool. And you can call it something like a critical hit or headshot or something like that. So I'm going to call it a headshot. And then you want to select the actual system over here. And if you scroll down a little bit, currently you have the emitter crit, and that's linked to the bool, and that sets a color over here. So we can override this emitter crit, and we're going to use our own custom bool. So simply look for the bool that you just created and plug that in over here. And then you can save this and go back into your character. And over here you want to use that same variable that you just created. So that was user headshot for me. And then we can plug in the boolean from the input. So if we had a headshot, our damage numbers will turn red. And we need to plug in the target into the return value as well. So that should work like this. And now we can go back into our take damage function into our AI and make sure that we call it. So over here, drag off the cast, and we're going to spawn our damage numbers. Over here, spawn damage numbers, and then we can grab the location from the input because we added that to our interface. So that's all the way back here. And then let's go back here, and we also have the local headshot boolean, so we can plug that in and use our local damage as well. So that should be set up and good to go, and plug it back in so the execution actually continues, and that should work. So I think we have a bunch of stuff set up, so let's have a little test, and then we're going to look at the animation lockup if we switch weapons too soon and fire weapons too soon and things like that. So I've launched a quick lobby. Let's have a look at everything if this is working. So I made a multiplayer game so we can check if the replication for the damage numbers is working and things like that. So I can see damage numbers on my own screen but not on the server screen, so that should be fine. And let's see if I actually get a headshot, then I will get a red damage number and I do double the damage, so that's good. Okay, this guy is falling, so let's go to the server and let's make sure that the actual FX is working over here as well. So that seems to be good to go. And we have some impact sparks for the body as well. And I probably can grab these guys, and I'm falling off as well. So, okay, that was an awesome test. Well, that seems to be working. So first let's take a look at setting up our montages and then we can do a final test. So let's open up our character, and right now if we would fire a weapon too fast after we reload, or we fire too fast after we switch a weapon, we can actually lock up our animations and we can't do anything anymore. So we're gonna take a look at fixing that, and that's not really too hard. So first of all, let's grab one of the play montages nodes, and I'm gonna right click and look for find references. So we have 3 play montages over here, and one is for the fire montage. So this one doesn't have a boolean or anything hooked up to it, so this should not cause any problems, and we can simply leave this one alone. So if we move on to the next one, this is for reloading. And as you can see over here, we set our isReloading boolean back to false on completed. But if we would fire our weapon before the animation is completed, this will not get executed because it will use uninterrupted, for example. And then our isReloading boolean is still set to true, and because of that we cannot reload anymore. So first of all, we're going to simply plug in our uninterrupted into the false setter as well, and we're going to do the same thing for the other play montage, which is the weapon switching montage. So over here uninterrupted, you also want to plug it into the is switching weapon false setter, and that should fix a little bit of our issues. And now we also want to make sure that we cannot fire our weapon when we are reloading, or when fire when we are dashing, and a few more of those exceptions. So for that we can actually go into our check ammo function, and in there we can make all of the changes that we need. So in here we determine if we can fire a weapon or if we can reload, and we can simply add a little bit to this. So let's make a little bit of room over here, and I'm gonna simply grab an end node for this one. So let's disconnect it and look for end. And over here I want to add 3 more conditions and plug it back into this condition. So first of all, I want to know if I'm reloading or not. So let's grab is reloading, and I want only to be able to fire if I'm not reloading. So I'm going to look for a not boolean and make sure that it's hooked up and plug it in over here. And I want to do the same thing for switching weapons and dashing. So I can only fire weapons if I'm not reloading, not switching weapons, or not dashing. So let's grab our is dashing and is switching weapons over here. And both of those need a not bool as well. So let's copy those and plug everything in. And that should pretty much cover our firing situation. And then we need to take a look at reloading. And for reloading, we pretty much only want to block it when we are switching weapons. So right now, if we are firing a weapon and we press reload, we will stop firing. So that's pretty much good to go. And the only thing we want to make sure that if we are switching weapons, that we cannot reload while switching weapons, because that might cause issues along the way. So over here we want to disconnect our end boolean, or we do not need to disconnect it, sorry. We can simply add a new condition to it by clicking the little plus sign, and we want to know if we are not switching weapons. So let's grab that one and plug it in over here as well. And now that should pretty much cover most of our issues. So right now, if we would go back into game, we should be able to simply smash buttons and not break anything, hopefully. So let's have a little look. And we can also do the final testing for the damage number replication to make sure the client doesn't see the server damage numbers and things like that. So let's switch to the server first, because the client was working, we already knew that. So I can only see my own damage numbers, so that's fine. And if I'm firing my weapon and I press dash, I will actually stop firing, so that seems to be working as well. And right now, if I would switch a weapon and then fire it, it's not firing because we blocked that, so we cannot break the animations over there anymore either. So obviously I'm falling off again. I should probably place a railing or something. So I think we have pretty much all of our exceptional situations covered, and we also have some impact effects going and a little bit of extra smoothing out done. So it wasn't a really exciting episode, but yeah, these were things that kind of needed to happen and also make our game a little bit smoother. So thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be back next time with more.